Hi, and welcome everybody. Good morning to everyone except bon après-midi à nos collègues dans les provinces Atlantiques et Maritimes. You know, remembering those brave Canadians who put their lives on the line defending peace and freedom matters as much today, of course, as at any time in our history. But how we honor our veterans' service and sacrifice is changing very quickly. Monuments and ceremonies are always going to have their place. But if we really have to evolve our commemorative activities to include more digital tools, as we know, and spaces if we really want to engage with Canadians. Bienvenue à cette discussion virtuelle sur la commémoration à l'ère numérique. Mon nom est Anthony Wilson-Smith. Je suis le président et directeur général du Historique Canada. Je serai votre animateur pour la discussion aujourd'hui. I want to acknowledge before anything that the land that I'm on in Toronto for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and more recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to work here. Alors que nous nous rencontrons virtuellement, je souhaite également reconnaître les troupes et les terres sur lesquelles vous êtes tous rassemblés d'un océan à l'autre. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome opening remarks now from the Honorable Lawrence Macaulay, Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defense. Welcome and thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And when I was Secretary of State 25 years ago, commemoration largely meant gathering at monuments and memorials here at home and around the world. It meant wearing poppies on your lapel and observing the 2 minutes of silence together every Remembrance Day. These things are vitally important and they will never change. But the world is different now. We can carry it around in our pocket, and that has changed the way we do things. Even before this past year, we knew we had to find new ways to honor the folks who served our country in uniform. It's been even more important as we had to mark some major anniversaries from home, and we will continue to build on it in the months and years to come. Whether it's on social media or otherwise, there is a lot of work to be done to make sure we're able to pass the stories of those who served and given their lives along to our kids and our grandkids. That's what today is all about, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. I look forward to hearing what our panelists have to say, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, de vos mots d'accueil. Ceci est le plus récent volet de la nouvelle série de rencontres virtuelles d'anciens combattants Canada sur l'avenir du commémoration. As with so many things, the pandemic's forced us to reevaluate how we work and how we engage more digitally. That includes how we engage Canadians in remembrance and recognition of Canada's military. Anciens combattants canadiens ainsi que Historique Canada cherchent des moyens de communiquer de manière numérique avec les Canadiens et les Canadiens de tous âges de divers milieux. One of the major goals of Veterans Affairs Canada's new approach to commemoration is to help Canadians better understand how those who served Canada helped advance peace and security around the world. If you want to share your own thoughts on how Canada should commemorate newer generations of service members, we really want to know. You can do that by visiting HTTPS, the usual, couple of slash marks, and then letstalkveterans.ca. And that's the key that you find on Google, the letstalkveterans.ca/commemoration to have your voice heard. Today, we're going to talk with 3 panelists who are expert in this field. We'll talk about the future, and I'm very pleased to say that we at Historica work very closely with the organizations and the expertise that each of them bring to the table. We'll talk about the future of commemoration as it relates to digital activities and initiatives, and new ways to educate and engage a younger audience, particularly as well in the virtual world. So let's meet each of the 3 right now, beginning with Captain Kirk Sullivan. So Captain Sullivan's a public affairs officer at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and Washington's from where he joins us. And I'll say this for myself, the genius behind the CAF in US Twitter account, which is one of the best social media accounts anywhere, period, in my view, and I think that of many others, for its intelligence, its empathy, and the quality of its information and reliability. His Twitter account, their Twitter account, has more than 68,000 followers and is known for its unique approach in the ways I just outlined to sharing information with followers. a large portion of the, CAF and US content is related in particular to recognition of Canadians who've served, which makes it particularly relevant to today. Carolyn Patton is next, from joining us from Edmonton. And for over 25 years, Carolyn's advanced creative offerings of multiple corporations and advertising agencies in both Canada and Europe. And today is the owner, in addition to being the owner of Patton Communications in Edmonton, volunteers for creativity at significant initiatives, including Canadian Armed Forces. As the granddaughter of a Great War veteran and the wife of a veteran of more recent conflicts, is also a board member of the Vimy Foundation. And finally, finalement, Caroline Dromaguet. Caroline est directrice générale du Musée canadien de la guerre. Professionnelle, chevronnée au milieu du milieu muséal, Caroline possède plus de 20 ans d'expérience liée, entre autres, à la gestion des musées, à l'élaboration et la prestation du produit culturel, ainsi que des initiatives et des partenariats internationaux visant à positionner stratégiquement la riche et fascinante histoire du Canada sur la scène mondiale. Elle tient à favoriser la collaboration, la pensée novatrice et le leadership au sein de la communauté muséale au Canada. Thank you, first again, now to all of you who are joining us, for in particular those who submitted questions for our panelists. We've used those received and added some others to provide for our questions today. So let's get going. We'll begin on issue 1, such as it is. We just went through a brief snapshot of the careers of our people in the digital world, but also want to hear the thoughts of each of you on evolving social media and digital remembrance opportunities and initiatives. So we won't go to everybody for each question because we hope to carry a lot of ground, and a lot of you are going to have to be shorter than we would like you to be, frankly, but we've got some room to roam here. En commençant avec Caroline, avant l'arrivée de la pandémie de COVID-19, de nombreuses activités du Musée canadien de la guerre étaient axées sur l'expérience du visiteur au sein de la structure physique du musée. Comment le musée réinvente-t-il l'expérience d'apprentissage pour l'amener aux Canadiennes et aux Canadiens par l'intermédiaire de vos médias numériques? Et quelle occasion envisagez-vous pour promouvoir la diversité de l'histoire militaire du Canada?
Merci, Anthony. Merci. Très bonne question. Une question qui est, je pense, dans la pensée de beaucoup d'institutions culturelles. Et bien entendu, le musée de la guerre est un musée national situé à Ottawa, comme on le sait. Nous avons toujours été préoccupés quand même par un mandat national. Alors, on arrivait quand même à rejoindre un vaste public, que ce soit par l'entremise de nos expositions itinérantes, nos programmes éducatifs publics et nos médias sociaux. Mais c'est sûr que avec la pandémie, il y a eu beaucoup de contraintes. En fait, le musée, je crois, a été fermé pour la plupart de l'an dernier. Donc, ça nous a vraiment servi de tremplin pour augmenter notre présence numérique, il va sans dire. Donc, je pense que le premier test pour nous, ça a été dans le contexte de la commémoration du 75e anniversaire de la fin de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Alors, nous avions plein de produits, des expositions prévues, toutes sortes de choses, et on a dû transférer beaucoup de ces initiatives-là en ligne. Mais en fait, ça nous a apporté des bonnes occasions. Alors, par exemple, nous avions une exposition sur la libération des Pays-Bas que nous avons pu adapter à un format numérique. Nous avons pu faire plein de partenariats avec, en fait, des gens qui sont sur l'appel avec nous aujourd'hui pour échanger avec nos experts et tout. Et nous avons pu aussi augmenter notre présence avec beaucoup de diversité. Donc, l'exposition de l'artiste Molly Lambeau-Bach, qui est une artiste, une femme artiste très reconnue de la guerre. Donc, ça nous a vraiment permis d'aller rejoindre nos publics différemment. Ça nous a aussi donné un excellent tremplin pour nos programmes scolaires. On remarquait qu'il y avait un déclin des écoles qui venaient sur place pour différentes raisons, soit qu'ils n'avaient pas accès aux ressources nécessaires pour se rendre sur place. Et donc, c'était quelque chose auquel on pensait beaucoup, mais la pandémie nous a vraiment élancés dans tout ça. Et alors, nous sommes en plein projet pilote où nous pouvons offrir nos programmes scolaires en temps réel, où les salles de classe peuvent discuter directement avec nos experts et recevoir le programme scolaire de cette façon-là. Et ça s'étend à tout le Canada, bien entendu. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment excellent. Nous avons également pu augmenter notre présence sur les médias sociaux. Alors, on a vu une augmentation assez significative de cette façon-là. Et ça a permis d'engager des dialogues, beaucoup de dialogues à l'échelle nationale, où on voyait, les gens avaient vraiment besoin, ils voulaient partager leur expérience personnelle. Ce qui a vraiment augmenté aussi ces échanges dynamiques et diversifiés. Et peut-être finalement, la deuxième partie de votre question au terme de la diversité. La diversité est toujours présente dans nos intentions de développer nos produits, mais encore une fois, de pouvoir le présenter en ligne, nous pouvons faire davantage. Nous pouvons aller rejoindre des publics diversifiés pour recevoir leurs histoires personnelles et vraiment présenter ce qui est notre force au musée, c'est ces histoires personnelles, alors que ce soit à l'échelle individuelle, nationale et internationale. Ça nous permet vraiment de faire des liens un peu partout, au-delà du Canada, sur nos plateformes numériques et d'inviter justement ces dialogues très, très, très diversifiés. Donc, vraiment, je pourrais peut-être conclure en disant que on veut rester à l'écoute de nos publics, que ce soit les enseignants, que ce soit les vétérans, que ce soit les monsieur, madame, tout le monde qui forment nos publics et de présenter ce qu'on a à présenter d'après ce que eux recherchent et pas ce que nous nécessairement pensons qui est nécessaire, mais de vraiment s'adapter aux besoins d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
Bon, merci Carolyn. Carolyn Patton, the Vimy Foundation creates opportunities for young Canadians, of course, to learn about our First World War legislation programs and sending youth on battlefield tours to the extraordinary Canadian National Vimy Memorial, as any of you will know, have been there in France, which of course is also not possible through this period. So it's brought distinct challenges to you as to our other panelists. Can you talk about some of your innovative initiatives you've done as a result? Particularly, I'm thinking about the First World War in color, but there's some others as well, where you re-engage young Canadians to learn about this defining moment in our history more than 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're very right. We have a world-renowned site at Vimy Memorial, but no one can go there right now, and that affects our outreach and affects our digital strategy. And previously, we have sent youth to the memorial and the World War I sites with the Vimy Pilgrimage Award. So, for example, we're creating new online experiences for youth in particular, and we converted the Vimy Pilgrimage Award into an online conference with significant speakers, and that was well received. And we've also created a new webinar series called Beyond the Ridge, and also in podcasts. So we're creating content where people can choose how they want to digest that, I suppose you could say. And when we engage with young Canadians, it's especially, we try to do that peer-to-peer engagement. There's no better messenger for youth than other youth themselves. And primarily, we are, Instagram and Twitter-based. But we also had those beautiful World War I colorized images, and that's an incredible asset for our foundation. But we realized that analog collection and stories had their value in an online capacity, so we identified that as a digital strategy. And the images also create opportunities to align topical issues that are very relevant today, 100 years on, such as the Spanish flu or from the medical corps. And that becomes very meaningful storytelling to what is happening and affecting us on a day-to-day basis right now.
Thanks, Carolyn. Moving to you, Kirk, the CAF and the US Twitter account, of course, lets the audience know or reminds people that both Canada and the US, they're two countries with shared interests, with shared histories and values. At the same time, if I may, you've had to do this through a period where, for a variety of reasons, we've been more reminded of the things that divide us at times than the things that unite us. I think it's been we could agree, it's been a challenging time in some ways, but you're looking to bridge that. You've also said when you send out a tweet, it's like walking into a person's living room in a way. So do you want to talk about that a bit, how you keep your audience engaged and why it's important to tweet or retweet stories of notable military milestones and those who served, at a time when that need may not be as apparent as well?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Anthony. If I may, just first, I'd like to acknowledge that 1 year ago today, we lost 6 of our fellow members who were serving Canada in the Ionian Sea. We think about them, their families, their friends every day. It's a reminder, as we talk about remembrance in a digital age, that it's not a long ago and far away thing. It's something that stays with us every day. So how do we keep our audience engaged? Well, I think you have to ask a number of questions. Who is the audience? Who are we? Who do we represent? What do we represent? The answers might seem obvious to a lot of you when you see me and you understand that I'm here in the US as a military diplomat. We represent the Canadian Armed Forces in Canada, and we present ourselves daily to Americans. But what is Canada? What does our military represent? What do we want to be? Who are Canadians? Who are Americans? I ask myself these questions every single day. And it might be nuanced to the question, but I think it's more about determining how to engage with people who are already engaging with each other. As you acknowledge all the various conversations that have happened of late that can have the impact of dividing us. So if we acknowledge that these conversations are ongoing on social media, it is like walking into a crowded living room. And at least where I'm from, and I think most places, you wouldn't stroll in, make an announcement in that crowded living room and leave. You'd listen to the conversations first. You would try to understand the individuals, their concerns, their fears, their joys, what makes them laugh, what makes them cry. So in understanding that, engaging necessarily consists of a lot of listening, weighing, considering. And then after all that thinking, which admittedly takes much longer for me than it does for most folks, you try to add something to the conversation. So you, instead of planning something, you bring in something that relates to the daily conversations that happen on social media. So often that's something from our past, obviously, as people who follow the account know, and whether that's a military mission or a personal story about those who served. I think these stories, like I represent the people who lived those lives, who lived through those stories. And that doesn't merely include the triumphs, that it obviously includes the less shiny parts that we don't talk about enough. I think they help define who we are as a country and as a military.
Thanks, Kirk. For the next question, I'm going to actually, I will be a bit selfish and put a preamble just involving our own efforts at Historica. So this is about the various tools, what makes sense to what audience, how we use them. And, you know, in our place where we make, for example, our heritage minutes, and we do the memory project, bringing veterans' voices and veterans to, you know, to schools and other public places, and also with the Canadian Encyclopedia, we're always looking at evolving digital media trends. And one of the issues we're going to talk about a bit after is how to appeal in particular to young people. I know that, so where I'm coming on this is, I know that about 6 or 8 months ago, a number of our people started talking about the idea of going to TikTok with its short format and much more youthful audience. And I got to say that at that point, I said, I don't know, I'm not sure that's going to work. It has worked enormously well. It seemed to me a bit counterintuitive given everything, but it has broadened our audience literally in the millions overall and by more than a third, and brought us a new audience. So that's been our experience within, and then we target other places. But I'm curious in turn about, here's Carolyn Patton. Let's start with you. So Vimy Foundation is creating a virtual experience so you can experience the National Vimy Memorial and surrounding park from your home or in your classroom or wherever you're able to do that. Just talk about that initiative and describe it a bit.
Sure. You know, for many of us right now, we're in a state of stationary learning, you know, without the benefit of traveling. So the idea is, instead of going to Vimy, we're really going to take Vimy to the world through this new digital experience. And it's called Vimy, a Living Memorial. And it will coincide with the 105th anniversary of Vimy next year in 2022. And it will draw upon a set of, you know, stories and events and create a new narrative for the legacy of the First World War that really resonates to our realities. But in developing it with our many partners, which is Veterans Affairs and NFB, the idea is to create a walking app with stories, audio, images, and they're geolocated to the memorial and the surrounding area. And it will be quite quite a robust experience. So you can really go for a walk anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter if you're in Whitehorse or it doesn't matter if you're in Washington. So dare I say that it's the gamification style of digitizing historical content. So it creates this new, unique learning asset that will augment our educational programs, but really it can augment anyone's learning and research into, the Battle of Vimy Ridge and the First World War. And we'd be able to offer personalized stories and creating this really unique experience that will be accessible for free for anyone. So it's really digitizing that Vimy experience.
So related to that, and I'm going to go to each of you on this next one. As we said, learning about remembrance, teaching military history has really changed over time. The events themselves are static, only happen once, but how we look is often so much different. Many Canadians no longer have the direct links with relatives that was the case maybe 20 years ago and longer. And of course, newer Canadians often have no direct link to Canada's past. So the overriding question is how you reach those individuals to help them connect. And Kirk, that'll be a bit different in your case when you talk about a primary American audience, but it's a related question. So on va commencer avec Caroline. Le Canada en tant que nation est en pleine évolution. De nombreux nouveaux Canadiens sont originaires de régions où l'armée canadienne a déjà été déployée. Comment le Musée canadien de la guerre utilise-t-il les médias numériques pour se positionner afin de demeurer pertinent pour toutes les Canadiennes et tous les Canadiens, en inciter des gens à vouloir apprendre l'histoire militaire du Canada et à reconnaître le service et les sacrifices de celles et ceux qui ont servi?
Certainement. Merci, Anthony. Ben, c'est sûr qu'avant d'arriver sur les plateformes numériques, on peut aussi dire que dans le musée, dans nos murs, dans nos galeries permanentes, bien entendu, c'est très important de présenter ces différents récits-là, ces histoires personnelles. Et souvent, on fait ces liens avec ces pays où les militaires canadiens auraient pu servir. Donc, il y avait cette opportunité d'ouvrir ces dialogues-là avec nos publics à l'intérieur du musée. C'est sûr que, comme tout le monde, on a dû s'adapter pour continuer à entretenir ces dialogues-là. Et je crois qu'on réussit quand même assez bien. Puis je peux vous donner un exemple avec nos ressources pédagogiques. Et on reçoit beaucoup de feedback des enseignants, comme je le disais auparavant. Et on a vu que souvent, c'est un point d'entrée. Alors, les histoires personnelles, par exemple, du personnel militaire canadien, leur histoire personnelle est un tremplin pour une conversation entre les jeunes, peut-être qui ont eu des expériences eux-mêmes d'un pays où il y aurait eu un conflit et maintenant ils sont au Canada. Alors, ça engage cette conversation-là. Alors, ils peuvent faire des liens avec des expériences dont ils viennent d'apprendre dans le contexte de l'histoire militaire canadienne et ensuite sont un peu portés et incités à échanger leur propre expérience. Alors, on trouve que ça a vraiment porté fruit, si on veut. Du côté commémoration, la dernière année pour nous a été encore là une excellente occasion pour un peu adapter la façon dont on soulève et commémore le jour du souvenir. Donc, on a développé une nouvelle ressource virtuelle, justement, qui offre aux écoles, aux communautés, aux autres groupes qui aimeraient organiser leur propre commémoration. Alors, c'est une très bonne ressource où ils peuvent avoir accès à du matériel, bien entendu, de nos collections, du matériel pédagogique et d'autres ressources pour justement eux-mêmes prendre part à ces commémorations-là. Donc, je pense que plus que jamais, il faut avoir ces pistes et ces occasions pour les gens d'apporter leur point de vue de diversité et tout ça. Et que je pense que Carolyn en faisait référence tantôt, mais c'est de présenter l'histoire militaire d'une façon qui résonne avec nos publics. Donc, un événement peut-être qui a eu lieu il y a 100 ans, comment est-ce que cet événement a encore une incidence ou un impact sur ce que nous vivons aujourd'hui? Et je pense que ça va vraiment rejoindre tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes aujourd'hui.
Merci, Caroline. Kirk, as I said, your base is a bit different when you talk about looking to reach Americans and teach more about Canadian history. if I may, on this first part, and it will not imply that you agree with me, but I think as Canadians, we would say that Americans, when we watch, Hollywood movies and otherwise, often have the impression that Americans went to war, figure they went to war by themselves and did a lot of it by themselves. And of course, we do want to remind them that has not been the case, that we have not only been there, we've played a pretty key role. How do you engage Americans in saying, here's us and here's what we did alongside you as your allies, as your friends?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is understanding what they think about, what they worry about, what they talk about every day. And so, like I said before, it's important to understand what matters to them. And we know that military service matters a great deal to Americans. And we know that they talk about it routinely. So if I'm to inject our stories of Canada, and I think that that's the means by which we do it, we understand our stories, we understand their stories, and we say, hey, there's overlap here. Here's what we did. Here's what these people experienced. And for me personally, I'm not a historian. I didn't know enough about these experiences until coming to this position, the experience of Canadian veterans, that is. So diving into those individual personal stories, whether it's about military milestones from our past, big historical moments, I think telling stories, people will always be interested in a good story, always be interested to learn how people overcame significant challenges, both at home and abroad. So I think I know that Americans want those stories, that they themselves are interested in their own stories of that nature. So we've seen that they're also interested in similar Canadian stories. And you're right, most of the time when we dive in and tell those really powerful moments, usually it's when I get out of the way and let the moments shine for themselves, that it resonates with Americans. And for the most part, they didn't know those stories from Canada's past. So I think that speaks to a couple of things, that part of what we're doing is working, which is usually getting out of the way and showing Americans, Canadian veterans and their experiences, but also that I have work to do because we're still on a daily, weekly basis discovering that there's people who didn't know some of the more significant parts of our history.
Well, including, I would say we could probably agree, Canadians as well, who continue to learn about the Canadian role in the past. But Carolyn Patton, you have been involved, as I know from other initiatives, you've been involved in other initiatives in addition to VIMI, where Canadians can reflect upon service and sacrifice of those who served, our theme for today, and how to honor that. What are some of the ways to really make a meaningful personal connection when you look back at things that you've done? You've talked about some of them with VIMI, but they're, but in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that balance between, creating a really meaningful connection, both in the digital and the online world, but also we can't forget about the in-person event too, because that's what affects our heart and expression of commemoration. For the VIMI centenary in 2017 in Edmonton, we did something that was really different. And we had a 12-hour vigil from sunrise to sunset to mark April 9th, the Battle of Vimy Ridge Day. And traditionally, there's 4 soldiers that stand watch, but we did and created 4 news spots for citizens to stand watch at exactly the same time as those 4 soldiers. So we created an online website where people can register and tell their stories. We had over 200 people stand watch for 15 minutes. They could sign up for 15 minutes, and it was gone within 2 hours. And they stood from morning to night. But what we didn't expect at all was the emotion. And people brought photos, they brought mementos, they told stories, they asked questions. Many of them cried, and they shared online, and the engagement was huge. And I have to say it was probably one of the most moving experiences that I've ever seen, where we created these 8 people that were standing watch together. And the people that stood watch got a certificate that said, I stood watch. And so we know that some of the people didn't have a relative that was in any kind of conflict or war, or maybe even knew a person that served. And we had one boy who was young. His grandparents flew from England to see him stand watch on Vimy Day. And I believe this was the first time that this was ever done in Canada. And I hope that it's not the last. But the comment is that connecting that meaningful in-person experience with the opportunity to express online, and it provokes this wonderful conversation. And people were talking to each other who didn't know each other, you know, and but the emotion caught us off guard. You know, we were busy managing this unique experience, and we weren't prepared for the emotion. And I think that's where you create this beautiful, meaningful experience that people can tell their own stories, because through that process, they're now creating their own story to tell their grandchildren.
It's a lovely story and a lovely experience. And I think it knits together something that each of you have talked about throughout, which is that when you can reach people on a really personal level, you know, separate from the discussion of dates and places and overall numbers and things, but rather how people felt, how they were struck through there, that there's such great effect. And all of you, of course, do it so well. I want to move to a kind of a thorny issue, which is one, frankly, that we wrestle with all the time at Historica Canada, a very important one, too, and again, for each of you. And I'm going to ask each of you how you cope. And that's that, of course, Canadian history, like any other country, is filled with moments of great achievement. In the case of military service, of great heroism and great sacrifice on occasion. But in terms of us as an overall country, of course, also of failures, of sometime injustices, of things that we would wish to do much differently if we could today, and doubtless in future we'll look back at today and say the same. You know, I'm thinking here, of course, of treatment of Indigenous people and on a widespread case in terms of BIPOC communities and issues that have arisen, of gender bias, of things suffered within, and a whole list of things, again, of which I think everybody is aware. Discussing these things or bringing these things to light, looking for lessons or looking for acknowledgement or other things. You know, our own view is at Historic is that you make a very good country, or you make a country better by making people proud of those achievements, but also making people look and say, here's how we could have done better, here's how we should do better, and here's how we will do better. But Kirk, you know, you've talked about yourself about the need to be honest in speaking about our past, and you often deal, again, in a very empathetic way, but with on the Twitter account with difficult issues. So, you know, if you want to give your thoughts on how social media can be a medium to having conversations about difficult topics in a way that allows for new perspectives and understandings, and maybe, you know, when you've looked in modeling this account, as you said you have, who inspired you when you were thinking about how to take this approach? Because it's tough in your position. It is.
Yeah, again, acknowledging that social media is a discussion amongst a wide variety of people. And I think it is important in any discussion, certainly when you're representing the military, representing our country, that we're honest about who it is that we are. And so if we're going to be honest, I think we have to acknowledge about who we're talking about when we say our. We have to acknowledge that it's most certainly not merely those who look like me, who had the privileged and sheltered upbringing that I had in Calvert, Newfoundland. So if I'm to do justice, if we're to do justice by those I'm attempting to represent, I have to understand their stories, their experiences of Canada. I already said that I didn't know enough about them before coming here. So how do we do this? How do I do this? You seek out people from those communities, understand their stories, and obviously experts, actual historians. I'm not one. To learn more about the big us. So I learn about the experience of Black veterans, for example, from the work of former Senator Calvin Ruck, who wrote about No. 2 Construction Battalion in the First World War. And Kathy Grant, there's a great Facebook page called the Black Canadian Veteran Stories of War. Learn more about Jewish experiences through historian and professor Ellen Besser. And obviously, it's in the news of late. I learn about the tragic and terrible experiences of women as they serve their country through the words of people like Kelly S. Thompson, Sandra Perron, and even those who continue to speak bravely on a daily basis about what happened to them, sexual misconduct in our military. So obviously, you allude to the fact, you mentioned the experiences of Métis, First Nations, and Inuit in Canada. Unfortunately, again, I didn't know enough about that before diving into it to study about how to represent our country down here in the United States. So the horror of residential schools, and then obviously about those who survived those schools and still chose to serve Canada in uniform, and then returned to face extreme discrimination again. So how do I learn? Tanya Tagak, Richard Wagamese, you understand about Louis Riel, Noel Knockwood, Tommy Prince, Edith Anderson. I didn't know enough about them. I still don't know enough about them. And obviously the resources provided by Historica Canada, at the War Museum and the Vimy Foundation, they help me not only learn and understand, but grow as a Canadian. I see it really not only as an obligation in my professional role, but an obligation as a citizen of our country. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to the military, all of those issues? I really think it's quite basic. We come from those communities, military members do, but also on a broader level, that the military would be concerned about the very people we exist to defend. So when one of them hurts, we should hurt, and we should show people that we hurt as well. So we laugh with them, we cry with them, and we represent all of them. And I think that the stories from our past are critical to understanding who we are today, obviously including those stories we haven't heard enough about, the moments we maybe didn't live up to the notion that we all have of Canada. Who were we, who are we, and who do we want to be? I don't think that we can move forward as a country, that we can aspire for better until we're honest about our past. And I think that has to be an ongoing thing. So the people, I mentioned some of the folks, some of those particularly Indigenous folks in Canada are online, and I learn from them on a daily basis. But I think learning from people who are honest, who provide an honest approach to not communications, but engagement, are those who I learn from most.
Thank you very much for that, Kirk. And I do want to say a number of those names that you cite are really worth writing down and taking note of, some of the most important contributors in this regard. Et Caroline, ce sont presque exactement les mêmes défis que Captain Sullivan a mentionnés dans cet égard. Que faites-vous comme directrice du musée?
Mm-hmm. Merci. Et en fait, je dois vraiment être d'accord avec ce que le capitaine Sullivan mentionne. C'est extrêmement important pour nous en tant qu'institution publique d'histoire militaire de présenter l'histoire de ses bons côtés, de ses mauvais côtés, vraiment raconter l'histoire telle que l'histoire a eu lieu. Et puis, cette perspective est extrêmement importante. Donc, c'est une chose de présenter l'histoire, les faits, mais c'est tellement important de devoir assurer que cette perspective-là vienne des gens qui ont vécu ou qui vivent ces histoires-là. Alors, je pense qu'on le fait quand même assez bien au Musée de l'Histoire et les musées de la guerre, bien entendu. Mais c'est quelque chose qu'on doit continuellement devoir faire. Mais c'est aussi de donner des occasions pour cette expression, pour cet échange, pour ce débat. Donc, c'est sûr qu'on présente des expositions, mais on offre la possibilité d'avoir des dialogues, que ce soit des conférences, des panels. Et heureusement, avec le contexte de la pandémie, c'est très possible parce qu'on n'a plus les barrières géographiques ou des fois les défis financiers que ça peut engendrer. Donc, on a encore plus cette occasion d'avoir ces échanges, ces débats, des conversations très honnêtes. Et je pense qu'il va falloir continuer à le faire et vraiment de ne pas avoir peur de le faire.
Merci, Carolyn. Carolyn Patton, I want to tweak this question a bit for you because your grandfather fought in the Great War. I believe, as memory serves, that your husband served in the military, and that there's some other links. And of course, there's your own volunteer interest, which is considerable in the military. And you're targeting a lot of what you do at Vimy Foundation, otherwise, crucially, as you should, at young people. But of course, among young people, we know, they see movies, they see things that can often make war look like a grand adventure as it was sold to young people at many times in the past. We understand at this level that there's a lot more than that. There's horror, there's fear, there's loss at an enormous level. People are never the same, communities are never the same. How do you address communicating with that? We know, for example, of course, the loss, Vimy helped shape the nation, as is often said, but the losses were horrific too. So what's how to deal with the flip side of that?
Well, truth and transparency is key to understanding who we are and where we're going. And we serve no one when we romanticize war. We have to be able to dig deeper and be able to understand not the stories only from 100 years ago, but what is relevant to veterans of today. And also Canadians who have come from countries who have a very different experience with conflict and war. And it's very real for them because they have escaped for a better life. And when we look at those lessons learned from 100 years ago, we can connect that to today. And I think that's really important, and that can help inform and expand our perspective on how events and conflicts of the past and the present, shape us as individuals today. And in my home, it's very real. It's from my grandfather or my great uncle who fought to my husband. He was the OC of the NATO hospital in Kandahar in 2006, and there's lessons learned from all over. And to really connect that and to make it real is it has to be done through truth and transparency. We can't hide it, especially with our Indigenous population and the stories about when they came home. Completely unfair, but we can't hide that. We only get better when we learn from that, and also have an opportunity for everyone to be able to engage and tell their story and what is real for them. And movies sometimes don't do us a benefit, do they?
No, it's after all, it's a script that has a beginning, a middle, and a developed end before it even gets going. Here's a two-pronged question for each of you to handle. So, as a guy with gray hair, let me say that, when I was growing up, and I'm thinking way back to about the 70s or so here, in our communities, World War II veterans were everywhere. They were it was your hockey coach, it was the neighbor next door, it was the bank manager. In other words, the experience of those veterans was a living thing. It was very much a part of the community. And I think that was generally true across Canada, given the scale of our engagement. That, of course, is not so today, particularly with World War II. The remaining veterans we have left, bless them, are diminishing in number and well into their 90s. The engagement in community is not as clear, and the wars in which, or the conflicts in which, as your husband, that our younger veterans have been engaged in, are far away, and the impact is more difficult to describe. How, in each of your terms, and we'll start with you, I think, Kirk. Again, I know you have a split audience, but how do you convince younger people in particular of the importance of these conflicts, and how do you get them to pay attention in the first place?
So I guess it's more about understanding what they're paying attention to already than determining what I want them to pay attention to. And so then we insert the thing that we're talking about that pertains to their conversation. And I mean, certainly we've heard the news of the US drawdown in Afghanistan, which happened for us many years ago. But it's a more near thing, it's seemingly at least, to our American audience with regard to being involved in a conflict. combat conflict overseas. So I think, yeah, inserting into the conversations. But I mean, I come from, as I said, a very small town in Newfoundland, and I remember going to the war memorials back home, and it really being a very somber, incredibly somber moment, because the men and women of my grandmother's generation, they remember losing their family members to these wars. So how do I convey that to a younger audience? Again, I lean on those stories. I think people are drawn in when they understand the difficulties faced by other people. And I think explaining, most people don't realize when they think about those long ago wars, they don't think about the age of the people when they went. They don't think about people in their late teens and early 20s who basically suffered the greatest rate of casualties. So there's that aspect. And then why is it important? Well, I think being honest about war and what war looks like, as Carolyn mentioned, I think is critical. It's important that citizens in a democracy understand not only what it is that their military is doing on their behalf, but when we decide as a country to get involved in combat operations, I think it's important that people know that it's not a big adventure, which in our past, we know that that's what people thought that they were getting into. I know that people who joined the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, some of them at least thought they were going off on a grand adventure in Europe. And it most certainly wasn't the case in places like Beaumont-Hamel and elsewhere. So I think all of these daily interactions contribute to building awareness about experiences of our past. And I think that if we do it right, that we can reach them. I think it's possible because I think people are always interested in those stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you draw it back, Kirk, to that personal element you've all talked about. And I was mentioning earlier, and if I may again with historic, you know, I'm recalling that in the 75th anniversary of D-Day a couple of years ago, we did a minute, of course, which was devoted to a soldier from the North Shore Regiment of New Brunswick who went off, who was 47 when he landed on D-Day and was ultimately killed in the conflict. And he stayed in the military because he wanted to oversee all these 19 and 20-year-olds who went off to war. And we launched in the community from which he was from, a series of small towns not far from Fredericton. And I remember seeing the high school students who understood for the first time at 16 and 17 and looked and thought, you know, really saw it personally and thought, well, what would I have done if I was a year older and it was today? Would I have done it? Would I have engaged personally? And we saw, of course, the impact. And we still saw the effect today that history lives with us still, that there were communities that have never been the same because of the losses that were suffered, that the widow of, the daughter of the soldier, Archie McNaughton, is with us today and grew up essentially without ever having a father. And of course, the mother did not again. So you're dealing, Carolyn Patton, with, you know, and when we talk about the Vimy context, of course, with the conflict in which no one is alive any longer. So how do you transmit that in terms of that relevance? Et on va poser presque la même question à vous après ça, Carolyn.
Yeah, it's you know, we sometimes look to the veteran experience. The veteran experience is universal, and from, you know, coming together and what they did 100 years ago, we put soldiers in that same scenario today, and that experience is still very real and very, very connected. And I think in order to reach out to, you know, an audience and a young audience that may not know even what the Battle of Vimy Ridge is or any of the First World War sites, we need to do better, which is connect with very unexpected partnerships, perhaps, at the Vimy Foundation, so that you can almost have this mashup of creating ways to engage youth and not the expected, you know, partnerships, and whether it's through how youth express themselves now, which is art and music and other ways that are important to them. And I liked what, you know, Kirk said is, you know, you have to go to where they are, because in many ways they're not going to come to you. Just because you have something online doesn't mean they're going to show up. So you have to go to them, understand what is important to them, what is in their world, what motivates them, and then being able to offer and augment something that is meaningful for them. And it's hard. There's no doubt about it. And we're looking for those, ways for us to grow at the Vimy Foundation, but also to be able to offer something that is unique and different and modern to that new generation.
Et Carolyn, dernier mot sur ça pour vous?
Oui, merci Anthony. Ben, je veux dire, je suis tout à fait d'accord avec ce que mes collègues présentent et proposent. Et oui, c'est sûr que c'est une difficulté. Mais peut-être en terminant, je peux donner des exemples un peu plus concrets. Là. Je pense que l'important, c'est de rendre cette histoire-là tangible pour cette génération. Alors, créer des liens qui, pour eux, si vous me permettez en anglais, it makes it real. Alors, nous avons par exemple, le programme scolaire ligne de ravitaillement, Supply Line, ce sont des boîtes d'artefacts qui vont dans les écoles. Et à l'intérieur, par exemple, il y a une tunique de la Première Guerre mondiale en laine, ça pique, c'est lourd. Et quand les élèves ont la chance de mettre ça et de comprendre que c'est un jeune homme près de leur âge, qui a 100 ans passé, avait dû vivre dans les tranchées avec ce manteau-là plein de puces et de mouillés et tout. On dirait que l'histoire commence à s'imprégner, il commence à comprendre. Alors, il y a ces liens-là qui se font. Et puis aussi, peut-être plutôt sur des plateformes numériques, vu que c'est le sujet de notre discussion, c'est les histoires orales qu'on est capable d'enregistrer avec nos vétérans. Et c'est de l'entendre de leur voix. On entend les émotions et on entend leur expérience de leur part. Alors, au Musée de la Guerre, par exemple, on a une collection, je crois, d'au-delà de 500 témoignages oraux de vétérans partant de de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale jusqu'au conflit d'Afghanistan. C'est une collection qu'on espère augmenter. Mais je pense que c'est une de ces façons d'aller faire cette connexion très humaine parce que c'est la voix et c'est les émotions qu'on entend.
Carolyn, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, and so time for one, possibly two more questions. But here's an important one. Newer Canadians, not even new Canadians as such, but those who have arrived anytime really in the last, let's say, 25 to 40 years, what do you say or what do you show? This is for each of you again, to interest them, especially if they're young and they just say, look, I wasn't here. This wasn't my war. My family was in another part of the world. I wasn't even born then. Why do I care? What's the point of interest for me in this? So again, Carolyn Patton, this relates a bit to the same challenges with Vimy, where it's a long past thing. How do you answer that? What do you do for that?
Yeah, why should they care? And that's the overriding principle that I have in any kind of outreach or communications that we do is why should people care about this history and what the experience has been for veterans and soldiers throughout the years. And sometimes through stories, we learn about ourselves and we learn about who we are and how we react. And it helps inform our view on the world. So, if we can offer those ways to engage with narrative and storytelling, perhaps in a very simple way, we can just learn more about what we do, how we act, and what we can offer. And, veterans have committed to our communities and our country through service. And it's the same for citizens. I think there's an example there that where we offer opportunities for youth to contribute to their community through lessons learned and to be better than some of the things that we have done. I think that might be a way to be able to offer a way to commemorate and remember through making it real for them and that storytelling, and to help us just understand their world personally and the larger world around us.
Et Caroline, même question dans le contexte du musée.
Mhm. Merci. Je peux peut-être répondre de façon très, très personnelle parce que je tombe dans la catégorie que vous parlez, Anthony. Je suis arrivée, moi, à un jeune âge d'un autre pays. J'ai immigré avec ma famille. Et pour moi, l'histoire militaire canadienne était un petit peu plus détachée parce que c'était pas ce que j'avais appris, c'était pas ce que je connaissais. Moi, ce qui a vraiment résonné et ce que je pense qu'on fait de plus en plus et ce qu'on veut faire au Musée de la guerre, c'est de créer des liens avec le Canada d'aujourd'hui. Alors, quels sont ces événements qui ont marqué et ces actions de l'histoire canadienne militaire qui ont marqué et qui marquent encore le Canada d'aujourd'hui pour mieux comprendre le Canada dans lequel nous vivons. Et puis, peut-être plus pour ajouter qu'on est en train de réaliser de plus en plus que les nouveaux arrivants au Canada sont très intéressés, en fait, d'apprendre l'histoire du Canada par l'entremise de l'histoire militaire canadienne. Alors, il y a un intérêt et j'ai pas vraiment la réponse à pourquoi on voit ce phénomène-là, mais peut-être simplement pour dire que vraiment l'expérience de guerre et des conflits, c'est vraiment une thématique universelle et peut-être c'est une façon de rejoindre les gens de cette façon.
Kirk?
Yeah. So why should people care? I guess it defines us, or it's part of what defines us. Because, and by us, I mean our country, because what is Canada if not the people? I grew up with a map of Canada on my wall. And you tend to think about that, where we tend to think about the maple leaf and say, okay, this is Canada. But really, we're all of those experiences from our past, including our military past, that create this country. And so I would hope that people new to our country, new Canadians, would be interested in what made up us as we exist now. But saying that, I also hope that people don't feel obliged to do that, because I think a big part of, or at least I consider a big part of what a military exists to provide, is a society where people don't always have to talk about or worry about the military. And so I hope we get to a point where it's not as important. And I certainly don't think that new Canadians should feel obliged to learn these things, though I hope that they do. I really think that a military exists to provide that peace where people have the comfort to choose what they learn about their past. And obviously they do, but I'm fine if the social discourse gradually includes less about conflict.
So we have a little under 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you a personal question, and to be brief as well, running against the clock, but each of you have chosen to engage in this field in one way or another. Carolyn, many, many hours over many years volunteering. Kirk, leaving your small town in Newfoundland to sign a piece of paper, put on a uniform, and go wherever they told you. Et Caroline, pour vous, c'est pas seulement un job comme tel, ça c'est clair. What draws you to it, or what is the big emotional driver? Et Caroline, on va commencer avec vous.
Moi, c'est l'expérience humaine. C'est d'entendre ces histoires très personnelles et l'émotion. Et j'ai appris énormément à propos de notre pays et je continue à apprendre. Et c'est vraiment cette connexion très personnelle.
Carolyn?
It gives me a better understanding of what it is to be Canadian, my world around me. It helps me understand my family better on a very personal level. And it helps me share with my children and my immediate community around me. It's quite a personal thing, actually. Yeah.
Kirk, sitting in Washington, long way from Newfoundland.
A long way from Newfoundland. I certainly didn't think I'd end up here. When I was a kid, Montreal was like the moon to me. So Washington, D.C. is the deep reaches of outer space to that little kid. But I mean, I've been in the military almost 19 years now. Thankfully, my motivations have changed since I was in my very early 20s to now. And now I think they're about that idea of Canada, my idea of Canada, I think we all have our own ideas about who we are as a country. And I like the aspirational notion of our country, and I like the idea of working towards that. And if in some small way I can contribute to that, I don't know if that happens online or that happens wherever I end up after this. That's the notion, as idealistic as it might seem, that keeps me doing what I do. Yeah, I hope that we can continue to strive towards that notion of our country.
I think that personal note, if I may, is a very nice and very appropriate way for us to wind up our time today as the clock winds down. So I want to thank each of you, of course, Captain Kirk Sullivan, Carolyn Patton, and Carolyn Dromaguet for sharing your time with us and your reflections and thoughts, of course. I've been taking some notes of my own throughout. And you've given us a lot of things to think about regarding remembrance in a digital age. I want to thank all of you, in the hundreds, by the way, who have joined us for this today and for your submissions in advance, your thoughts afterwards, and your engagement right now. Also particularly, of course, to VAC, to Veterans Affairs Canada, for putting us together and for the continual effort and for the delight that all of us who work with you find the people there to be. J'encourage finalement les spectateurs à rester à l'affût de la prochaine rencontre d'anciens combattants au Canada afin de continuer à explorer des thèmes importants de la commémoration au Canada. Merci infiniment pour votre présence, votre participation. Thank you all so much, and it will be over and out from here. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.